There's a huge delay on my
We're
end.
live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Art of Game Mastery, Finding Paths. We are streaming again this week. We did a little bit of a test last week where we gave pre-recording a shot, and it went well, I think. And we're probably going to keep continuing to do that at least once a month for the foreseeable future until we really get some data on it. However, today I do need to jump off by 5 exactly, so it will be a relatively shorter stream, I guess. But today we're going to be talking about retiring adventurers rather, and late game adventuring. So first of all, I apologize. There is a dog barking pretty loudly in the background. I don't know if it's coming out in the video or not.
I can't hear him.
Okay, that's good.
I don't
That's
hear
good.
him. I'll let you know.
So, to jump into this, Jackie, why would you consider retiring adventurers, the characters, and at what point in the game would you consider doing so?
So, usually when I start with my adventures, I like to give them a way to wrap their backstory into the plot, and sometimes we achieve those things, and the player has this epiphany that now that they've completed the goals that they've kind of set out to, they no longer feel the need to, continue on adventuring with the party. Sometimes they have goals met, they achieve what they're looking to do, and it's time for the player thematically to move this person along. And sometimes they don't come to that conclusion thematically, right? This is usually the answer to the in-game question of, hey, GM, I want to play a different character.
Yeah. And that's another thing is like it could just be a matter of them getting bored or they're not liking the class. And Matt Colville recently did a video on retconning and saying, hey, it's not a big deal if they want to change their class or whatever, right? Like, especially if it's early game or even early mid game, really. But retiring the character and just building a whole new character could be an alternative to that. Like, you might not want to continue playing the same character. Maybe changing the character's class might be a little too much of a suspense of disbelief to really continue the verisimilitude of the game. And you say, hey, well, why don't we just make a different character and we'll send this one off in a proper manner, right? So how would you, in your games, how would you go about doing that? I have my own opinions here, but I want to hear what you say first.
Yeah, so it depends on the motivation of the character. Sometimes the character is going back to school, starting a new job. It's too hectic for their situation, and they need to part terms with the party, on good note. And so a retiring adventure is something that's going to be needed in your GM tool belt. And one of the ways that I handle that is by allowing the player to kind of come up with an idea. Sometimes they want the support of the other players with their idea. Sometimes they just want to spend all of their gold that they've hoarded, and kind of, live out the end of their days. Whether it's make that magic shop that they've been talking about doing with all those magic items that they've accrued. Sometimes it's just owning a plot of land, and you can kind of do these things with after they complete said quest, that the lord or king of the area is going to give them, a title, a deed, and you can kind of turn this PC into an NPC.
Yeah, I think in your Tagasea game, you did this pretty well with Gunner. I had to take a temporary break from the game because the work got really hectic. And when I was getting ready to come back, you were like, hey, do you want to keep playing Gunner? Because you had turned Gunner into a kind of an NPC, right? And he was just kind of run by anyone who needed to do anything with him. Like his skills and whatnot were accessible. He wasn't participating in combat, I don't think, but he had high crafting skills, so he was like being utilized and for crafts and things like that and whatnot. So when I came back, I'm like, I don't know, I kind of want to try playing something else. So we kind of kept Gunner as an NPC, and I brought in a new character at that point. So I think the NPC approach is a good one. You also mentioned bringing in like plots of land and whatnot for for the party. I think this is a great idea. I think it should be done early, though, in order to set the stage in case something like this needs to happen. And I'm really excited for Pathfinder 2e's Kingmaker adventure path. It should be coming out in March or April or something like that, sometime this spring. But it's going to supposedly have rules in it for managing a settlement or managing a kingdom, and things like kind of very Harvest Moon, Stardew Valley kind of stuff, right? Like managing your homestead, having your followers and your companions and stuff have a place in this kingdom and their role in upkeeping it and everything. I imagine it'll have a gold cost for doing various like upkeeps and expansions and things like that. So this kind of stuff can add another dynamic to the game. And it also gives you a place to retire your adventurers too. For instance, like even once a character hits like level 20, right? Like you could prestige the character and create your own prestige feats and classes and whatnot. That's certainly one approach to in-game content. But another alternative is just these characters have done their time, right? They've paid their dues and they're ready to retire and move on, and they can settle down in these kingdoms that they've established and kind of just run them as the lords and ladies of these kingdoms and kings and queens and whatnot. So, and then this gives you opportunity to bring in new characters, probably lower level, that are just starting their adventures and picking up, where the story left off kind of deal. And I think that's a really great way to kind of send the previous party off to the sunset kind of deal in a glorious way. And then kind of keep the game going. So you don't have to start a whole new game. You're in a whole new setting and whatnot. You can just keep going. This happens pick up right where you left off kind of deal. And I think that's a really interesting approach to that. Do you have any experience doing any kind of thing like that in the past?
I mean, I really liked that you had suggested kind of Harvest Moon style ahead of time with those plots of lands, because then when it comes to retiring, it'll feel less forced at the end. It'll feel less contrived if you introduce these things ahead of time. So if you are getting late in the adventure, then it's probably a good idea to start incorporating who is going to be the reward giver, right, for these so-called quests, even if it is a personal quest or if it's just for, who's going to help aid this person settle down. And I do have some experience in some other games that we've played. I really like Gunnar because I wanted to touch a bit on your character, since they were kind of pivotal to the story at first. They were kind of working their way in with discovering the mystery of these hags and building intrigue with the courts. And so even though they became an NPC, the players still wanted to keep going back and visiting Gunnar because they had kind of a safe space, right? You had this basically a castle in a pocket dimension, and it's really useful for running, you yourself ended up using it for running your thieves guilds, like operations. A lot of the other players used it for crafting purposes, for taking stuff. They were basically coming up with magic items, and then they needed a place to kind of cash in those magic items. And since Gunnar was a crafter and he was kind of retired, they were just leaving those items with Gunnar, and then Gunnar was crafting the items.
Gunnar also had a number of NPCs that the party had quote unquote collected over recent endeavors, and they have kind of, because they had lost their home, story aside, they had lost their home, and Gunnar kind of gave them a place inside of this pocket dimension. It was a large manor, like it had a lot of rooms, a lot of facilities. So I think we had a blacksmith, we have a seamstress, I believe, and I'm trying to think of all the NPCs we had. We don't use all of them very often, but we had a couple that I had recruited into my thieves guild. But yeah, we had a number of like just general NPCs that were previously in a town that had got destroyed, and we like gave them a new home here, and they kind of became like this, our followers, so to speak, and they kind of became our tools to utilize. I don't like using that term, but they're tools to utilize to solve obstacles. Like Tia, for instance, was a very prominent blacksmith. We built her a forge by collecting the materials needed to do so, and that let her we also gave her the ability to create magic items, like through some training. And that, so she kind of became a replacement for Gunnar doing that. Now we can go to Tia and be like, hey, I need you to fix this rune to this weapon, right? And we're not in a place where we can easily find someone who can do that. Like, we're not in a major city or something. So we just need to find a magic circle, get to the Hintercrest, and have Tia do it for us. So and it doesn't cost us any gold. It doesn't cost us, anything extra there. She's kind of like our helper, I guess. So that was really convenient. And that's exactly kind of what I was going for when I said, build out this kingdom, or in this case, a homestead where you have these facilities and you have these helpers, and they can kind of alleviate some of the pains of adventuring that you might come up with.
Right on. I have some other experience, actually. Another GM did this with me back in 3.5, where basically they were going back to school, and I was the guest PC for a time. And so I had shown up during their break and was playing with them, and then they went back. They were going to like UCI or something. And so I could no longer continue in the campaign, and they wanted to keep me around since I was playing an infamous lich who had played kind of a pivotal role in unhollowing a city and running a huge undead camp. And so we kind of retired me, and the game continued on with them, where they continued playing in person, and I was not able to meet up. This was like a time before we had virtual tabletops.
Yeah.
So we can continue to kind of communicate via email about how to retire and progress the person, so that like the other players could interact with my character. So
how'd you end up doing it?
For the purpose of, well, the best way that we found was basically to have a reason for my character to stay in the city and kind of run the show. So after we did some major cataclysmic events, we kind of just they all kind of just like promoted me to being like undead general or king of the area, basically. And so my character continued to stay on in that area, and then my friends, the other players, would come back as needed and then go out and continue their adventure.
Right.
So,
yeah, I guess it should be noted that the kingdom homestead management aspect of things isn't really necessary. Some groups don't enjoy that stuff, and that's fine. If they don't enjoy it, I wouldn't force it on them by any means. It's just I found that's an easy way to kind of make what they're doing make sense. But you very much can just say, hey, they became the king and the lords, ladies, king, queen of a kingdom somewhere, and kind of hand wave it. That's totally an option too. Maybe they'll interact with the new characters, will interact with them in the future. Maybe they'll come across that kingdom or settlement or whatever. And that's totally reasonable. You also mentioned something in the past about quests, and I thought that was an interesting approach as well. It's something I haven't really utilized, but once you mention it, I'm like, that's actually not a bad idea. So once you retire these adventurers, right, and you build a new party with new characters, it could your old characters could issue quests for your new characters. Alternatively, you could, and I don't know how this would work because I haven't tried this in practice, but you could have like kingdom level quests or settlement level quests or whatever for your old characters that are more like political or social or something that they need to do. They need to win some favors. They need to do something in order to stop some, they almost become like a faction at that point, right? We talked about factions in the past where, you need to, now all of a sudden they're running this kingdom. They need to, fend off advances from other kingdoms. They need to deal with monster outbreaks. They need to, there's all these things that come with running a kingdom that aren't necessarily combat in nature, right? But if your players are into it or like open to it, you might consider having these kind of side quests for their old characters running these kingdoms that are more social or political in nature. That could be kind of cool, could be fun. Or maybe they just happen in the background, right? Maybe you just roll some dice in the background Like you have another in your story, you have another kingdom approaching their kingdom, and you just want to see. I don't recall in our video about factions, did we go over giving factions a mini character sheet? I don't recall if we touched on that.
I believe I had mentioned that like on the virtual tabletop that I use for Roll20.
Use
I actually use
clocks.
like a handout. Yeah, I use a handout.
Okay.
The virtual handout like works really well for keeping track. And then I told you I use like fractions for keeping track.
So
of the
I
clocks.
use personally. I give all my factions a mini character sheet that have their own skills and their own stats. And when factions end up in conflict, I use those stats and skills to determine who wins that particular conflict. And you might just do the same kind of thing. You might just give the old character's new kingdom its own stat sheet, its own character sheet, and then behind the scenes kind of roll some dice and see what comes out of these conflicts. And who knows? Maybe the old character's new kingdom becomes in a bit of a bind and needs the help, and they hire the new adventurers to help them, kind of deal. And that kind of gives the players a sense of nostalgia when they come and interact with their old characters. You have to be careful there, because at that point the GM becomes the person who controls those characters, and not all players like the idea of someone else controlling their characters, even if they aren't playing them anymore. So it's you got to make sure that your players are on board with this, and maybe consult or not consult, but check in with them after every session to say, hey, did you like how I ran your character? Did you anything you want me to do differently in the future, kind of deal? Is there something I missed with their personality that you might not have, or that might not have been apparent to me? Kind of make sure that you're not stepping on any toes when you're running someone else's character. I think this is just a good what's the word?
Good social stuff in general.
Yeah, it's like
part of like the social
social contract. Yeah,
contract.
So
I almost said construct. I had social construct in my head. Yeah, we did something like this with one of our players. I'm sure you know Ray now. Like when they were playing as Cortez, they had basically come to me and they had said that they wanted to retire the character. And when I had asked them, like what was the reasoning? They were new to Pathfinder. They wanted to start up learning how to use the spell system, since the spell system was pretty complex. So they said that they had a good understanding and they wanted to run a druid. And I was like, okay, so how do you want to do this? And so we had the character up and ready ahead of time. And their biggest thing was that they wanted to die in an epic battle, because their particular character, for retiring purposes, they didn't want them to go off into the sunset or have a plot of land or whatnot. Like, to them, death in battle was like the most important thing. Which is why we had the kind of cutscene.
The Valhalla approach, right?
That absolutely. So that's why we had like the cutscene for them in game, where they to stress that the enemy that the players were fighting against, it was an instant KO to the person, to kind of help push the story along. That was like something that they had requested. They die, saving other people, and they tried to save the town. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of retire a character, and in both cases I've seen it really works when you just ask the player, like, well, what would fulfill your character's needs, right?
Yeah.
So as a GM, you just gotta listen to your players, find out what it is they want, and find a way to execute that.
Yeah, it's really important to keep in mind is, how you retire a character might be different, than retiring another character, right? And we can't stress enough that talking to your players and figuring out what they want the end of their character to be. Maybe it is they die. Maybe it is they run a kingdom. Maybe it's something else entirely, right? Maybe instead of running a kingdom, they found some, like, maybe they're a rogue, right? And they found a thieves guild and they just want to run the thieves guild. Like, it becomes a thing in the world, right? And there's all kinds of things, and you can't possibly come up with all the reasonable options. So you kind of offload that to your players and be like, hey, what do you want your character to do? How do you want it to go? And if sometimes at the end of a campaign, like at level 20, everyone's going to be retiring at once, and you just sit down and have a session where you guys hash it out. Sit down, almost like you had a session 0 at the beginning, maybe you have a session X at the end, right? where it's just our session Z or something, whatever you want to call it, where you're like,
The one that comes before the final one.
yeah. So like, what do you got? Like, how do we wrap these characters up? And it almost becomes like another. It almost kind of like leads into another session 0, because now you're coming up with new characters as well, right? You're saying, you know, first of all, how do we want these characters to exit the stage, right? And once you figure all that out, now you're like, okay, now what are these new characters? How do they know each other? What are their roles and everything? How do we integrate them into the existing world, the existing story? What does the new story become, right? Like, now that we've solved the major threat of the world, there's bound to be some fallout, right? So maybe what is that fallout, and what are the consequences, and how do your new characters fit into this? You know, and how do they continue? How do we keep the story moving forward? And that really much is another session 0. So it's kind of like a Ouroboros type effect, right? You're kind of setting you're ending things for a new beginning kind of deal.
Mm.
I haven't actually tried that in practice, by the way. That is just something I just thought of right now, but I think it would really work naturally, having kind of a session Z. And maybe I should put more thought into that, and maybe do like a mini GM Basics video on that and give it a shot. But I think it's a really natural way to kind of reset
our
things.
Games.
What was that?
We'll have to incorporate that into our games.
Yeah, it seems very natural.
Most of your games are, a lot of your games are kind of just starting.
Yeah. I mean, Tagasea is very much reaching I mean, it could kind of be at that point right now, honestly, with the recent situations, developments. Yeah,
exactly.
So maybe we consider that.
I was
don't
hoping
know.
to go all the way to 20 but
yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to go to 20, right? It could just be the end of the campaign, like the players have succeeded on their goals, whatever those goals were, and they could either find new goals, or they could say, you know what, we're happy with the state of things. Let's just retire these characters and decide if we want to make new characters or just start a new campaign. Like, that could be option 2. You don't have to continue on in the same campaign and world, right? You could very much just choose to start
that it's not forced. I don't know if you noticed, but I've already introduced a lot of side characters, kind of like the B group. So
yeah,
it's not a bad idea to introduce them, although there's a lot of different things that can get really tricky, because if you start introducing or getting ready the characters, it can really bog down combat if they're not sidelined as an A group, B group. And we've already seen like the way Tramer handles their I don't know if you were in their games where they have basically like A group and B group are very separate locations.
Yeah, it was the Starfinder
so it's kind
game.
of like yeah,
I was in there at the beginning. Yeah, I actually like that approach. That was very and like when A group was acting, they had some roles for B group in there to kind of give them some action in there as well, which is kind of cool.
But that really helps with kind of furthering the plot, because some of the characters are going to amass so many favors, or they're just going to become too powerful, and their alignment with the party might deviate. So they might no longer hold the same ideals that the rest of the party has.
Mm-hmm.
And some parts of the party is ultimately it's going to come down to is that like the party members, their background or their personal plot, their investment in the story is just, I just like to go with the party, like whatever the party is doing.
Yeah.
And so like some of those people might want more content than like what the story has in store for it, which is why you kind of why we lead into the late game content, right?
Yeah.
So some of the adventurers might want to retire, but some of them might want to have like one last skirmish. They want to have one last dungeon. And so maybe even after you finish the story, it's time to kind of come up with what can still challenge the players, especially if we want to, come back to them at a later time.
Yeah, the one concern with the B group thing, it's in like something that could happen. Naturally, when you have a B group like that, especially if it's been around for a while, is that their level tends to be similar to the A group, like not the same necessarily, but similar. And when you do retire the A group, the characters might not want to. They might want to restart at a lower level. There's a lot of fun in lower level play, especially in Pathfinder 2e, and your players might want to experience that low level play again. at which point you run into conundrum, what do you do with the B group? Because like if the B group is level 10 or 11 or whatever, do your players want to play a level 10 or level character again? Do they want to, or do they want to go back to level 1? If they want to play level 10 or 11, then just make them play, let them play the B group, right? But
Yeah.
if they don't want to do that, then what do you do with the B group? That's
I mean, no lie, like all of the Shifting Sands games that I keep jumping in, they're all level 1 games or 2.
yeah.
And
So
I'm
far,
loving the thrill of adventure because, like, I noticed this was a critique of 5th edition, right? Where the first tier of games is that level 1 to 3 kind of games. And that's kind of like the most exciting part of the adventure, right? And so sometimes retiring the adventure is good because people want to feel that setting off on a new adventure kind of feeling. They want the thrill of combat really could, a mistake could really kill them. I personally really like that. I know there are some people who absolutely hate that mentality of the game. So you kind of have to just be a judge of like what your players are looking for. Like if they're heavily invested in their characters, it's almost like you don't want to kill a level 10 character, but you're more okay socially. It's more socially acceptable to kill a level 1 character, right? And like the higher level that they get, there's this kind of sunk cost fallacy that like you've invested more and more time in the character, so you don't want to die, you don't want to retire them.
well, you've had more time
still in
with
the
them to
background.
really develop their personality and become emotionally attached to them. Yeah, I think that makes sense.
But in the background, you're still probably thinking like, oh, but they made magi classes and or magus, and they made so they made all these like new classes since when Tagasia started. We just had the core rulebook.
Yeah.
And
And
so a lot of new
ancestries
classes have
too.
come
There's
out.
been so
New
many ancestries and versatile heritages and everything come out that, yeah, that's one of the nice things about a West Marches like game, I think, and kind of is a bit of a tangent, but it really lets you experiment with all these different things and see what you like and don't like, so that when you do get into like a long running campaign like Tagasia, you have better idea of what you want to play long term. Because you've experienced a bit of everything at that point. But
right,
yeah,
so
but like
offering your players late game content, sometimes it's I like to blur the lines between video games and tabletop RPGs, and I get accused of doing this a lot, and I do it intentionally, at least I think so. If I don't do it intentionally, I'm doing it unintentionally. Like I'm doing it either way. There's a lot of those end game bosses, right, that are hidden away in, some Omega dungeon. They're off on the side somewhere, and I think it's totally appropriate to have that in your games. I don't think that it's going to suspend disbelief with your players if you have a final raid, a final dungeon that that's off somewhere else, especially if the players have, beat the BBEG, right? Like sometimes the players want the show to go on even after they won, just to test out, the experience that they've earned or the magic items that you've been dishing out.
Yeah.
They want to have more examples of like places that they can use them.
Well, I mean, I'm a fan of having this kind of dungeons in the world, regardless of the state of. I'm a big fan of having dungeons that aren't tackable until you're the appropriate level, and letting the players determine whether the appropriate level or not, by either trying it and failing and running away, or trying it and dying and suffering the consequences of their decisions or whatever. But I think it generally lends to a more believable world. I mean, there's going to be in any world, there's going to be fantastical beings. They're, whether they're demons or they're, elementals or something that is like beyond reason, that is just super powerful and manifested or has been sitting there for centuries, just kind of gathering strength. Like there's going to be something like that in the world, and it's not necessarily going to be level appropriate, right? So I'm a big fan of having that anyway. I think having it as kind of like a last hurrah is okay if the players want to do that. I think that's kind of like in your session Z or whatever, you might discuss that, have that as an option. Be like, hey, do you guys just want to have one last hurrah with these characters? Do you want to just retire them now? Like, what's the plan going forward? I think rather than the GM deciding it, I think talking with the players and deciding what they want to do is probably the better approach. Because, I mean, if you kind of demand it as a GM, players probably aren't going to complain I mean, because it's there, but they might not be entirely enthused with it. So I'm a big proponent of any kind of decisions like that being run by the players. But it's not the end of the world if you just kind of use your GM fiat there to say, hey, you know, we're going to tackle this one last dungeon one more time. I think, at least. I don't know. Let us know in the comments what you think about that. Do you think this is something you should absolutely talk to the players about? Do you think a bit of GM fiat should be allowed there, or, you know, or something else entirely? We'd love to hear your opinions on that.
Yeah, absolutely. While you're at that, don't forget to like and subscribe.
Well, we still got 30 minutes left, so we're not over yet.
I thought you said you had to leave early, so if you wanted to...
we could chop it off here, I guess. Yeah, it could be a little shorter episode. So yeah, like and subscribe. Definitely share our videos if you like them. Try to share them on various social media platforms. We're really trying to get our engagement up. We're trying a bunch of different things with like what do you call them, tags and whatnot in YouTube to try to get more views and get our videos presented in the algorithm more. It's always a big challenge to us because we are in at the same time we're in a vast space with a lot of competition, but YouTube doesn't understand the nuance of our competition, right? Like this particular stream is very much Pathfinder 2e focused, and this particular channel is very much Gamemastery focused, but YouTube doesn't understand that nuance. So they're throwing us out there with 5e, with all this stuff. So I think that anytime, if you're a Pathfinder 2e or a Game Master, or you enjoy our content, definitely share us with your friends. We really appreciate it. Like, subscribe to our channel, like our videos. Let us know in the comments as well. Do you guys prefer the live or do you prefer the VOD style? We aren't completely sure yet which approach we're going to go. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we're kind of trying both and seeing what ends up looking the best metric wise, but we love your feedback as well to see what you like. And don't forget to check us out on Spotify. We are on there if you prefer the more audio only approach. If you have like a long commute or something and just want something to listen to on the way to work or the way home. Yeah, don't forget to hit us up in the Discord. The Discord has been popping lately. We've been getting a lot of new people coming in. We love to see that. Shifting Sands has been taking off. We've been a lot of interest in that as well, the West Marches style game. Jackie has a 5e game.
Changes to the Discord. Yeah. We're doing some changes to the Discord to make it more manageable for everybody who is on there. And we want everyone to be able to see like kind of like what games are going on. That way it doesn't seem like nothing's happening on the Discord. So I'll be having another game. So there'll be a 5th edition. Hopefully this game will be broadcast live, so we'll send links to that. John and I, we have to finish the Fate game, so we should be setting up a date time for that, right? So
we can do that. Now that things have calmed down at work a little bit.
Right, so we do Fate games as well. If you do check out the Discord, I am in the works of trying to do my research on how to run Blades in the Dark. We had somebody who was interested in throwing a game. Don't know if they're still interested, so if anybody else is interested in throwing Blades in the Dark game, we'd love to see some other people's take on it.
I would also like to find someone who's interested in running a Powered by the Apocalypse system game. I'm really intrigued by that engine, and I don't know much about it. I want to do my research on it, but if you are experienced in that system and are willing to run a one-shot, let us know. We'd love to have you. It doesn't have to be streamed, we could just do it, privately. That's fine, whatever you want to do. But totally interested in running that system. What else was there? Oh, the Shifting Sands is probably going to be picking up more and running a lot more games more often. So I'm probably going to be incorporating more GMs into that as well soon, because we've had a lot more people come in and be interested in playing, and being the only GM and being the busy person I am, it's hard for me to make the time to facilitate everyone. So look out for that. If you're interested in being a GM of Shifting Sands, definitely let me know. We will... I'm not sure how that process is going to work yet, but we will be... We
need to test that out, like, between us first, I think.
Yeah.
I was looking
I want
to
start
run,
at least gathering a list of interested
Sands.
people, though, so that I can...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think I can drum up a group, no problem.
Yeah.
So we should probably set that up in the future. So we're gonna have spots open so that I'll be running GMing Shifting Sands as well. It's a different tabletop, so I'm not too familiar with. It's running Foundry.
Yeah,
Is that what it's
Foundry.
called, or Forge?
Forge
So,
is the hosting platform, but Foundry is the VTT. Yeah.
Right. So we'll be hosting a bunch of new games personally ourselves, as well as we have another GM who runs Starfinder. I believe they're short on a player, as well as we have another GM who is running Pathfinder 2E. Actually, we have two other players that are running Pathfinder games, but I'm pretty sure their games are full at the moment.
I think so. Yeah.
So, we just had somebody recently in the Discord who was looking for running Pathfinder as well.
Okay. But yeah, there's lots of stuff going down in the Discord. Definitely jump in, join us. The invite link is in the description of this video, or it should be. I'll double check, but I'm pretty sure it is. So definitely come in, say hi, introduce yourself, and we'd love to have you. Until next time, happy gaming.